Our scripture this morning is from John chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The word of the Lord. I was in the Seattle airport earlier this month on some vacation time, and I saw a man wearing a hoodie that said, "Happiness is less of me." That sort of bumper sticker kind of phrase on a hoodie caught my attention, and my guess is that each of us is going to go a different direction if we hear that. What does that mean, and what is this person wearing this hoodie trying to communicate to the rest of us, or to himself? We can only guess, but I will tell you where that took me in my mind, and I know I'm strange. I'm a preacher, and I think about things differently than other people. I took this to be a kind of theological statement or a spiritual statement describing the man's sense of himself in relationship to God. Happiness is less of me and more of God, right? And you can see that logic there. So there's logic. I'm not totally crazy. There's logic there. Happiness is less of me and more of God. I think this is sort of a spiritual thing. This is sort of part of his spiritual community, his community of faith. They were talking about I must decrease, the words of John the Baptist, so that God must increase. And there's something about this. I mean, if this works for this man, if this helps him, fine. But there's something for me that bothered me about this, and that I think it kind of reflects how we imagine the relationship between God, the Creator, and the creation. We kind of imagine God as being this kind of entity and creation being kind of another entity, that God stands, if you will, the Creator stands over against creation. And less of me means more of God. It's as if we would put God on a scale, as if God weighed something, right? And me on a scale, and let's see, I need to be less, and I'm really happier if I'm less and God is more. I think it's a strange way of thinking. And as we're in the season of creation this fall, I'm thinking a lot about how we imagine the relationship between the Creator and creation. And I think there is no more important issue in our times theologically than how we imagine this. And I will say that I think we've gone off the rails in our times. in how we think about this. I was listening to a book by Jared Diamond, sort of the, an anthropologist who's written at a popular level, and he was talking about hunter-gatherer societies. This is a book about hunter-gatherer societies, which is a particular obsession of mine, for those of you who know me. And I loved this book. I thought it was great because he's talking about hunter-gatherer societies, and boy, that's just really interesting stuff, and I can get into it. And then he began talking about God and how religious people think about God, and I said, oh my goodness, that's completely wrong. He's completely ignorant about classical theistic traditions. This is crazy. Like, this man is extraordinarily ignorant theologically. And then it occurred to me that he probably is right. That probably at a certain level, at least in Western civilization, this is how we conceive of God. As kind of being a supreme being, this reality out there who stands over against the rest of us. And it's how we think about ourselves, right, as creatures, each of us individually as creatures created by God. It's how we think of ourselves, and how we think about ecosystems and trees and animals and so on, all of creation. We stand over and against this supreme being. And so we end up with hoodies that say, happiness is less of me, right? Again, recognizing that might not be what this man had in mind at all. God is not that way, I want to say. And God's relationship with creation is not that way. We imagine, I think, like the deists, the old clockmaker god, the deists of the 18th century, who said, God fashioned the universe like a clock and set things in motion, and there it went with its laws and rules and so on, and that's God. And we kind of have some version of that. We think of God as a manufacturer or the divine strategist with a plan. God has a plan. Like God is some CEO somewhere in a boardroom with this collection of board members making decisions about what we're going to do. That's right? We imagine God in those kinds of terms. Or maybe God is an artist fashioning a work of art, a sculpture. The universe is a sculpture. And God stands over against the sculpture and evaluates it and looks at it and I'm going to do this and that. That's our imaginary, right? Or something like intelligent design, which I think is a crazy word. It's a crazy term. It's popular now to talk about this, as if God is a designer, as if God is fashions something. The world, the creation, is fashioned. Now, I will concede that the Bible is filled with this kind of language, right, about God in this way. But in our times, we have become such biblicists and so literal that we fail to see the poetry in it. We fail to see that this language is analogical. We fail to see that its language is poetic, that it's metaphor. And it's strange to me because you go back and you read the writers, the ancient writers in late antiquity, and they understood this. They read the Bible and they understood it. They weren't literalists. They knew what was going on here. But we in our time are literalists. We have conceived of God as a supreme being standing over and against creation. This is deeply problematic. And in the times in which we live, times of ecological crisis, times in which we are so alienated from the world around us, and times, dare I say, which we are alienated from God in new ways, how we think about creation and our relationship, both as individuals and as a whole creation, to God, the Creator, is crucial. The sermon title this morning, What Sort of Person Is This?, is a reference to a particular biblical text, Matthew 8. And it's one that we all, those of us who grew up in Sunday school know this text. Right? We grew up, I can still see the flannel graph image. Remember flannel graphs? Do they still have flannel graphs? Are they a thing of the past? This is a digital age. We don't have flannel graphs anymore. But I can still see the flannel graph image of Jesus and the disciples in the boat. The squall has come up on the Sea of Galilee, and there they are in the boat, and Jesus is asleep. And the disciples are terrified. For good reason, right? Good reason. And Jesus is just leaping through the whole thing. And they wake him up and said, Jesus, look at what's going on here. And Jesus calms wind and sea. And the disciples ask, what sort of person is this who even the wind and the wave obey? So in the framework that we have been speaking, I want to talk about obedience. If we conceive of the relationship between creator and creation as this supreme being who stands over against creation, we have an idea about what obedience is, right? We tend to think about power dynamics, the way they work in our world. When it's time for my dogs to eat, and Shelby, the exuberant black lab, who many of you have met, needs to settle down, I say, sit, right? And she sits, and you know why she sits? Because I have leverage. I have food, and she wants the food. I have power, right? In this situation, I have leverage. And she does it maybe because she loves me, and who knows what all else we could say, right? But I have a kind of authority in her life, and then she sits, and then I release her, and she eats her food. Right? That's a kind of obedience, and we think of obedience in some version of that. Right? We obey people who have leverage in our lives. Our employers, we want you to do this, and if you don't do this, we're going to fire you. That's leverage, right? And we think about something like obedience in this kind of language, and it's a subject and it's an object, right? This is what I say, and you do it. And when we think about this passage, the wind and the wave, creation, we tend to think in those terms. Jesus has leverage over creation, and it's somehow this leverage, which we don't understand, that gives Jesus power to coerce, to compel obedience from the wind and the wave. I am suggesting that it doesn't work this way at all. I don't necessarily know how it works. That's tricky. But I'm convinced it doesn't work like this. I am convinced that the obedience of creatures, the obedience of creation to the Creator, does not work in the language of power and leverage and compulsion. That the nature of our relationship to the Creator, of our relationship to God, is radically different than how we imagine, and that obedience has more to do with a bond between Creator and creation, a participation of creation in the life of the Creator, and a kind of deep down knowledge, not yet fully revealed, of the creatures and of the elements of creation, of who they truly and really are, that Jesus calls out. It's a very different, it's subtle, but it's a different way of imagining this relationship of obedience. Acts 17, this passage, which is such a gift to us, I think this sermon, a kind of sermon that the Apostle Paul gives at the Areopagus in Athens. Athens, of course, is the city of philosophers. The Areopagus was this rocky outcropping at the foot of the Acropolis, where the Parthenon is and all those things. And it still exists today as sort of a relic, I guess, a museum, where Paul gave a speech. And he said, he talked about God. He talked about the God, right? And he said, you Greeks, you have an idea that there is a God who is not just a supreme being, but who is undergirding everything. You have an idea of this. And I want to tell you about this God. This God, Paul says, created everything that is. He goes to creation, right? He goes straight to creation. This God made heaven and earth, the sea, this refrain from the Psalms, and all that is in them. And this God, though this God did these things, is not far from each one of us. And he says, even as some of your own poets have said, it is in this God in whom we live and move and have our being. We exist. Creation exists in the being of God. God does not stand over against us. God does not stand over against creation. It is in God in whom we live and move and have our being, our very existence. If I were to disappear from the face of the earth, and my footprint would be completely gone, Shelby the dog would still exist. Shelby would still be with us. But if God were to cease to exist, to never have been, creation would never have been, because our existence is contingent, entirely dependent on the reality of God. The relationship of creator to creation is beyond our imagination in so many ways, yet it's so different than what we think. One of the challenges at College Mennonite Church, one of the most difficult decisions that we face on a regular basis, is how many people are going to show up to a funeral or memorial service. And we are meeting with a family. You're meeting with a family, and you ask the question. We have this sheet, where you fill out all these things that we need to know for the logistics in an event. So you ask the family, how many people are you expecting at the service and at the meal? And it's a facepalm question, because they have no idea. And so you go through it and you try to guess, and inevitably somebody in the family will say, well, we're not really sure, but we would rather have more food than too little, and we can always take leftovers home, right? We have this poor couple at this wedding in Cana, and they didn't plan very well, it seems. Or maybe they were poor and they just simply didn't have enough. We don't know. But the wine ran out. Oh man, how embarrassing. This poor couple is going to be known for the rest of their lives in this small town as the people with that wedding where the wine ran out. You don't want to be known as that, right? 30 years hence, somebody says, oh, I remember your wedding. The wine ran out. Don't know what else happened, but the wine ran out. And Jesus says, well, my time hasn't come. But Mary knew better. And she said to the servants, do what he tells you to do. And how many gallons was it? Like 30 gallons? 30 gallons of wine? It's a lot. It's a lot of wine, isn't it? What a frivolity. What a frivolity. When we think about all of Jesus' miracles, right? Say in John's gospel, the raising of the dead, the feeding of the 5,000, all the healing that goes on. Each one of those situations is kind of life and death in a certain kind of way. This is not a life and death kind of situation. Right? This couple might be embarrassed. They might have a good story about the wine running out, and they might feel a little ashamed about it going forward, but it's not life and death. It is total gratuity. It is added on, unnecessary, free, and it's for one purpose: joy. It is for the purpose of joy. An amazing story. When we think about the meaning of creation and our relationship with the Creator, what God longs for us, what we groan for, whether we know it or not, what we groan for is that joy. The joy that creation takes in its Creator. And there's something about wine, whether you like wine or drink wine, whether you're a teetotal, there's something about wine symbolically, sacramentally, that's powerful. It represents something. It represents something of this wedding. It represents something in the life of the church. And it represents something to creation. The water is revealed to be wine. The water is revealed to be that which partakes in the joy of its Creator and that which gives joy. And it reminds each one of us that is our calling and our purpose. That just as the water is revealed to be wine, the source of joy, each one of us will be revealed. Each tree will be revealed. Each ecosystem will be revealed. Each rock will be revealed as the joy of its Creator. Amen.